What is up, everybody? I'm back with an update. It's been, holy smokes, about a year since I've actually been able to drive this car. Um, it's been down, basically. And check out this amazing view today. Anyone who can guess this road, post in the comments. I'm curious if you guys can recognize it. It's here in SoCal, obviously. Anyway, I owe a couple people an update on the car. Two guys on NSX Prime. So for you other three people that's going to be watching this and don't know or want kind of a build update on everything, I'm happy to do it. Just post it up in the comments or whatever. So anyway, I wanted to talk about, ooh, there's lots of flies out today. It's that time of year here in SoCal. We had so many rains. There's a lot of standing water breeding all these crazy flies. Anyway, you don't see it on the camera, thank goodness, hopefully. So there's a few things I want to talk about in terms of updates on the build. First of all, let's talk about the performance and feedback on all the poly bushings that I put in the suspension components everywhere. So right now this car doesn't have a single stock rubber bushing except for kind of, you can't see it, you can almost see it there, except for on that compliance piece. But everywhere else is polyurethane bushings. So give you guys an update on that. The transmission, the 6-speed with the 4.23 Type R final drive and the Wave Track LSD. Give you an update on that as well. What else? Oh, the steering rack. So this has the S2000 AP1/CR. I think it's like 14:1 or 13:1 ratio. I forget all these things. I used to know it by heart. Give you an update on that also. And lastly, the big boy, and I'll leave it for the end, would be the engine. So there's a 3.6 high compression ITB setup in there. So let's just get into it. So real quick on the suspension, I have maybe, I don't know, 3,000 miles, maybe 2,000 miles on the suspension. And so far it's been great. Very, very little NVH kind of trade-off, but the stiffness and the communication that it gives to the chassis with the solid, not solid, but definitely stiffer durometer poly bushings is very noticeable. So I actually, it's so noticeable that I was able to change around my alignment settings from what most of the kind of preferred NSX setup is, which now I'm running almost, I guess just a tiny bit of toe in the rear and zero toe in the front with lots of camber in the front. So I do have the Comtech camber bushings in here. So at this ride height, which is pretty darn high, you can see she's not really slammed, but I prefer this ride height because our roads here are bumpy and you need that compliance. And I'm not much of a car show guy. So the ride height where it's at now is pretty good. I like where it's at. And also the lower you go in the rear, the roll center gets all fucked up. So that makes the rear feel a little bit floaty and I don't like it. So I kind of settled on this ride height. In my opinion, it's the best for the compromise. And first of all, so yeah, the suspension is good. I have no complaints. Possibly maybe a little bit more NVH in terms of harshness, but in my opinion, she's pretty good. Like I'm kind of at a point with my ownership history of this car that I just want to drive it now, especially having it be down for a long time. It's been down since COVID, most of that time until now. So the majority of the time it's actually been down than it has been running, which is kind of a shame. And I don't want to go through that again. So, oh, I need to polish this out. It's getting a lot of swirls. So yes, positive review on the polyurethane bushings. I forget the company. I think it's probably made from Anyway, I'll link it in the comments or whatever. Again, this is another one of my very, very low production videos. If I don't do this now while I'm just randomly out on a drive, this is never gonna get done, and the two people that I owe updates to are never gonna get it. So anyway, that's the suspension. Good to go, no complaints, a little bit of NVH, but the trade-off is good. All right, steering rack. So steering rack, it's okay. I'll be honest with the steering rack because, you know, I don't like the confirmation bias stuff that we all go through. I really like it. I have no desire to want to switch it back to the manual rack, but there are trade-offs. There are pros and cons. So for example, if the feeling of the manual rack was down here at kind of this speed, a lot of effort, lots of feel, once you get up to like this level, the manual rack for me gets a little bit unwieldy. So the trade-off that I was able to kind of think about, is the EPS on this one. It kind of pushes up that feeling up into the higher level. So down here at low speeds, it feels a little bit dull, a little bit numb, so to speak. But once you, especially with the zero toe and the I think I have like 2.7 degrees of camber even at this height, it is like, once it loads up, it feels incredible. And also with the quick ratio, it lets you place the car into these turns so much easier, and like recovering from a spin or even just drifting it is so much easier to catch. It's like actually really fun. So with the stock setup, it's something like, I don't know, 20-1 or 17-1 ratio. You get really busy with the steering wheel. You're just kind of, you know, moving it around a lot, and it doesn't really match this chassis anymore, in my opinion. All the things that I've done to it with the JRZ suspension, the polyurethane bushings all around, it sort of doesn't match that anymore. You need to update the steering rack, in my opinion, to get the most out of it. So that's sort of my feedback. You know, a lot of guys are definitely very anti-EPS, and I totally get that. There are moments when the manual rack will just be superior in terms of feel, but in terms of kind of the overall compromise of everything, you're not going to get me to switch back to a manual rack at all. Like, this is, to me, it really updates the setup. So, okay, next thing is the transmission. The 6-speed. So the 6-speed with the 423 and the wave track is probably the best street setup that I've had ever. And I'm at a point where, you know, it wasn't about the money with this car. It was kind of like, I wanted to be done building it. So I wanted to take all those lessons learned and just kind of put it into one build of what I think was the best sort of spec'd out NSX for myself. And again, priority being driver's car. I don't really care too much about like show and stuff. Although, you know, obviously we all want cars that look cool. But in terms of drivability mods, I think I'm done. Like, you know, famous last words, right? But I think I'm done. The 6-speed does make your shifts much closer together, but not like crazy close together. So it by the numbers, it's a tiny bit closer ratio than a 5-speed Type R spec. So the 5-speed has a short gears with the 4.23 final, which makes it even shorter, right? But the 6-speed makes that just a tiny bit shorter and closer together. So to me, it's my happy place. Even if I had a stock motor, I would still want that setup. Now, feedback on the LSD. It's basically a wave track. So if you guys want to look that up, it's very similar to like a Torsen or a gear driven style setup, but it's got kind of this like disc or wave in the middle. It's hard to explain until you see it. And I would say that it's not as good as the OS Geekend, and it definitely doesn't have that kind of 1.5 feel, especially off throttle into the corners. But the OS Geekend super noisy, super clanky. It's just, I really liked it for the track, and because I don't track this car anymore, I pretty much decided I'm done tracking this car. Maybe once in a while, once a year, or those special occasions with a bunch of guys, things like that, sure. But in terms of using this as my track car, I'm actually building a NC Miata for that purpose. So this is going to be basically just street canyon car exclusively now. So yeah, for street canyon, I really like that LSD. That LSD is probably, how would I say, it's probably the best compromise for a tiny lack of that sharpness, that bite that the OS Geekend gives you, and that off throttle sort of ability to play with the rear end. You lose a little bit of that, but overall, I don't get the peg leg spin out of these corners. Full throttle, I can get the car fully sideways with both rear wheels spinning. So it's kind of the best of both worlds in a way, but it's not as weak sauce as the factory clutch type. I'm getting destroyed by bugs. You don't see them, but they're just all over me right now. So anyway, definitely a big plus on the wave track if that's kind of the build that you want, where you want it to lean more towards street aggressive driving than you do the track. That doesn't mean you can't track it. I could track this setup all day long. It's just not gonna quite be as crisp, I think, as when I had the OS Geekend on there. But again, no clanking, completely benign. You'll never know it has an LSD in there until you get on the throttle, which is how I think a street car should be. Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room. This motor, huge props and thanks to HQ Engineering. They, throughout this whole process since COVID, holy smokes, it's been 4 years. They've worked with me and kind of, put together a package that I think it's pretty badass right now. I mean, the heart of this car, with HQ's help and ASM, Adnan over in the Netherlands, because those are his ITBs. I don't need to do anything more to this motor. To give you some numbers, it's a 3.6. It's got a stroker crank. It's got 11 to 1 roughly compression. Didn't actually do the math, but it's somewhere around there. So it's a little higher compression than normal. And let's see, ITBs obviously, 94 millimeter piston, so it's got a pretty wide bore. And yeah, like lightweight pistons. This thing revs like a rocket ship. It just like a motorbike. It's just boom, boom, boom. It's just great. If I wasn't such a lazy person with editing, because if I had to edit this video, it would never get out, to be honest, I'd show you guys. But maybe I'll upload another video of just, the sounds and maybe a GoPro footage of what it's like to drive out here. I'll try to do that soon. But in general, power-wise, let's do some numbers. How do I best relate this? It's doing just about 370 horsepower to the wheels and about 260 foot-pounds of torque to the wheels. So that's, roughly a 400 horsepower motor, or maybe more, depending on what percentage you use for tranny loss. So kind of wish I was him right now. That looks like a good time. So let me see, where was I? It's basically pushing out more power than a stock motor with a Comtech supercharger in any guise. So that is pretty awesome. It's got way more low end torque. Like the torque curve is just flat. It's just like a hill, like a very slow, very like smooth, fat hill. It's fantastic. I can't explain what it's like to drive this thing, but it's I don't know what to say. It's just great. The ITBs, it's a lot more streetable than I expected. It's got the Comtech ported heads, It's got the Toda C cams. So if you guys followed my build, this is actually the second version of this 3.6 that's in there. The first version was admittedly a little bit more experimental, and there were some issues that went wrong with that motor where this is why it took a year again to kind of take it apart, analyze it, figure out what went wrong, and fix those issues in the second iteration. So how is it like to drive? The tip-in is actually really tame, surprisingly, even with the Toda C cams. I was taking a leap of faith with the Toda C cams because I thought that those cams would be a little bit, like, not a little bit, like a lot too racy. But in reality, oh my gosh, like, there's very, very little trade-off with the Toda C cams. Yes, there is a trade-off. It's not 100% like super streetable. So what I mean by that is it produces zero vacuum. Like, I have no vacuum. You see that big tank right there that I still have to mount properly? That's the vacuum tank reservoir, so that I have brakes. And I also have to run a vacuum pump so that that tank has vacuum so I can run the brake booster. So it builds no vacuum. So basically you can, you know, you have to set up a braking or oh my gosh, I'm just getting eaten alive by these freaking flies. So anyway, that's that. But where you really notice the Toda C cams is very, 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 very light throttle. Like really, really, really light throttle. Like 1 to 3%. That's like maintenance throttle. Right around 2 to 3,000 RPM. And it starts to be a little bit uneven or a little bit jumpy, because that's really not the RPM that it was designed to operate at. And that's not the driving conditions that it was designed to operate at. So, you know, plus given the ITBs, where the ITBs don't like to be cracked open a tiny bit like that, it's not happy in those situations. So when you are on the freeway and you're kind of just like, you know, trying to maintain that 75 miles an hour, it's not always going to be happiest there. But to fix that, you just give it gas. And then once you give it gas, the whole thing, she just sings. Sounds fantastic. And in terms of sound, I have the Toda twin canister exhaust on there. And that is a very quiet exhaust. It's got the titanium tips or whatever. It's a very quiet exhaust because there's a lot of drama that comes out from these two intake tubes that feeds the 6 ITBs. So, gosh, what else is there to say, really? Huge thanks to HQ, David and Ryan and Frankie over there for, you know, getting this car put together. Again, Humpty Dumpty was apart for too long. And for them to take the time to put it together, I appreciate it. But I have so many people to thank on who helped me get through this, because a lot of the items on here were kind of had to be engineered, like those ITBs. I didn't want to just do a off-the-shelf Toda setup because I wanted some specific kind of ITB qualities. So anyway, if you have any questions, I'm happy to do a full sort of build breakdown one day. If there's a request. But for now, I have now 1,000 miles on this setup. It's pretty virgin, but I hope for another, you know, at least 50,000 miles out of this setup, maybe more. I just don't want to jinx anything. So yeah, hope that was worthwhile and enjoyable, and till next time, bye bye.